So Triple H doesn't know how to book his women's division. There's really no real narratives for most of the women on the roster. My problem with everything, though, is the lack of interconnectivity between all the women on the roster like you see with the men. There's a lot of history between a lot of the men's roster because they give them that time to have blood feuds with each other. For example, like a Drew and Damian Priest right now, right? Unfortunately, I believe for the woman, they don't really do any of that. While we do have Naomi and Jade, why is Bianca not part of this story? We're in an era right now where all these characters have multiple dimensions, right? So why is it that we can have this, for example, someone like a Karrion Kross is able to plant the seeds of heel turns into the various people in the roster and play into their stories, right? Where is the equivalent of that for the women? In terms of any real long-term stories, the Judgment Day, for example, with Rhea Ripley, Dominic, and Liv Morgan, that unfortunately overstayed its welcome. We take it back to when Rhea wins the title over Liv, for example, right? The title defenses, at that point where we had Nia Jax, and that was like a small mini feud, right? But there was never a long narrative game with maybe like Liv, because being part of the Judgment Day, talking to other heels, so then would then go after Rhea for her title, for example, right? There's not really a thorough web of interaction. Every storyline, every just feud in the women's division, when it does happen, if there is one, feels isolated in its own bubble and very much within its own continuity. Like you have Charlotte and Tiff, right, who up until the last couple of weeks didn't really have any fire going into it until they got extremely personal with each other, right, where that just feels like it's on its own. There's no one else vying for the title after, right, on SmackDown, it seems like. So it's very much like in its own island. Same thing with Io, Bianca, and Rhea. Well, if Rhea maybe had a storyline to cap off this build into Mania, we wouldn't be throwing together a triple threat between the top women in the division, because then the top women in the division would have already had stories and motivations for various things going into it.